Get out of my house! Those were the last words I heard before the door slammed in my face. My sister's hand still stung on my cheek, my knees scraped from when she shoved me out onto the cold pavement. The entire family sat inside, silent, watching me get humiliated. Not one of them stood up for me. Not my parents, not my cousins, no one. In that moment, the night air felt heavier than my own heartbeat. I wasn't just being pushed out of her house. I was being pushed out of my family, my place, my dignity. And as I stood there with tears threatening to spill, one thought burned louder than the humiliation. She thinks she's won. She has no idea what's coming. This isn't just a story about being betrayed at a family dinner. This is the story of how my sister crossed a line she never should have, and how I made sure she regretted every single second of it. Family dinners were supposed to be sacred in our house. They weren't tea about the food, though my mother-ass cooking always made them special, but about tradition. Every Friday night, no matter how busy we were, we gathered, laughed, argued, and shared. It was our unspoken rule that family came before everything. At least, that's what I thought. My sister, Clara, always had a way of making the spotlight hers. She was the golden child, perfect grades, the first to get married, the one my parents boasted about to neighbors. I didn't resent her, not at first. I used to admire her. But over the years, admiration turned into something else. Because Clara didn't just shine, she made sure I was left standing in her shadow. That night, the family dinner started like any other. The clinking of cutlery, polite small talk, laughter bubbling across the table. I smiled, I played along, but beneath the table, my fists were clenched. Clara had already made her little digs, jokes about my job, about how I still wasn't settled, about how I never quite measured up. Everyone laughed, everyone except me. And then, as if her words weren't enough, the situation escalated. Clara didn't just humiliate me with her tongue. She humiliated me with her hands. One sharp strike to my face, one hard shove toward the door, and her voice echoing, "Get out of my house." I stumbled outside, half in shock, half in rage. My parents didn't even follow me. The family dinner continued inside, like nothing happened. That was the moment something inside me broke and rebuilt. Because from that night forward, I wasn't going to be the quiet sister anymore. I was going to make Clara understand what it felt like to be stripped of everything. The night Clara threw me out of her house, I walked aimlessly for hours. My shoes pinched at my feet, the cool air stung my face where her hand had landed, and my chest burned with a mixture of anger and disbelief. The streetlights blurred as tears finally forced their way out, and I remember thinking, is this what family means? Is this what I've given my loyalty to all these years? By the time I got back to my apartment, my phone had already lit up with messages, not from Clara, not from my parents, but from cousins and distant relatives. "Get out of my house. What did you do this time? Clara said you started a fight. Why can't you just let her be happy? You always have to ruin everything." The words sliced into me deeper than the slap had. My own family, people who had known me my entire life, weren't even asking for my side of the story. They had already chosen hers. I dropped onto my couch, phone still glowing in my palm, and stared at the screen until the letters blurred. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. Instead, there was just silence, the kind that fills your ears until it becomes a weight, pressing down on you. Clara and I weren't always enemies. When we were younger, she used to braid my hair, sneak extra dessert to me under the table, and defend me when the neighborhood kids teased me. But somewhere along the way, the bond turned sour. Maybe it was when she realized she could outshine me. Maybe it was when my quiet nature made me the easier target. Whatever it was, by adulthood, Clara had perfected the art of cutting me down with a smile. And my parents? They encouraged it without even realizing. "Why can't you be more like Clara?" My mom would sigh whenever I failed at something. "Look at your sister. She's already married. She has her life together. She doesn't cause drama." Every time those words were spoken, Clara's smile grew just a little wider. And every time, a part of me shrank smaller. But that night, the slap, the shove, the humiliation in front of everyone, something shifted. For the first time, the shame wasn't just inside me. It was public. They all saw it. They all accepted it. And that made it unbearable. I spent the following week in a haze. At work, I couldn't focus. My boss called me into his office twice, asking if something was wrong. I just nodded, muttered something about stress, and walked out. Nights were worse. I'd lie in bed, replaying Clara's voice over and over again. Get out of my house! I'd clench my fists under the covers, nails digging into my palms, and whisper into the dark, one day, you'll regret this. The family divide only deepened. At first, I thought someone, anyone, might reach out. Maybe my mother would call, maybe my father would stop by. But the only call I got was from Clara herself, a week later. Listen, she said, her voice cold but smug. Don't make this bigger than it was. You embarrassed me in front of my friends and I had to put you in your place. It's over. Move on. I couldn't even form words. My throat tightened, my chest ached, and before I could respond, she added, oh, and don't bother showing up for family dinners anymore. Nobody wants the drama. Click. The line went dead. That was the moment the family split into two worlds. Hers, where she reigned, and mine, where I was cast out. And everyone else? They chose hers. I wasn't invited to gatherings anymore. Birthdays, barbecues, even Christmas. I saw the photos later on Facebook. My mother would send a casual text after the fact. It was a small thing, didn't think you'd mind. Didn't think I'd mind. The truth is, I did mind. I minded so much that it consumed me. Every night I felt the sting of being invisible. Every day I walked with the weight of being unwanted. And yet, beneath the sorrow, a seed had been planted. It was small at first, barely noticeable. But every time I thought of Clara's smirk, her hand striking my cheek, her voice echoing those hateful words, that seed grew. What she didn't know was that the sister she thought was weak, the sister she thought she could break, was slowly turning into something else entirely. I began writing everything down. Every insult she'd ever thrown at me, every time my parents had chosen her side, every injustice I'd swallowed just to keep the peace. I filled journal pages with details, dates, and emotions so raw they almost burned through the paper. At first, it was just to cope, but slowly, I realized what I was building. A record, a weapon, a story that wasn't just mine, but ours. One that could tear down the perfect image Clara had built for herself. Because Clara's greatest strength was her reputation. And reputations, they can crumble overnight. I didn't know it yet, but the revenge I was starting to imagine wasn't just about payback. It was about reclaiming everything she had stolen from me. My dignity, my place, and my voice. The family might have turned their backs on me, but I wasn't going to stay in the shadows forever. And deep down, a voice inside whispered, Clara has no idea what's coming. The weeks after Clara banished me from her house were some of the loneliest of my life. Silence became my only companion. My apartment, once a place of comfort, now felt like a prison. The ticking of the clock grew louder, the hum of the refrigerator seemed almost mocking, and the walls echoed with the absence of voices. I didn't realize how much I had relied on family noise, the laughter, the arguments, the clinking of glasses at the dinner table, until it was stripped away from me completely. At work, people noticed. My coworkers would ask, "Rough week?" I'd just smile faintly and nod, because how do you explain that your entire family has turned their backs on you? That your own sister shoved you out of her home in front of everyone and nobody said a word in your defense? Nights were the worst. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, unable to escape the replay in my head. Clara's voice, sharp and cruel, repeating, "Get out of my house!" Her hand slapping my cheek. The way my parents looked down at their plates instead of at me. The laughter that continued after I was gone, like my absence was a relief. I would turn on my side, curl into myself, and cry until my pillow was damp. Then, exhausted, I'd drift into shallow sleep, only to wake up again in the middle of the night, heart racing, the phantom sting of her slap burning my skin. What made it worse was the isolation wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I tried to reach out at first. I called my mom. No answer. I texted my dad. He replied with a single line, "It is better if you give Clara space." Give her space? I had been exiled, humiliated, erased, and somehow I was the one who needed to give her space? When I called again days later, my mom finally picked up. Her voice was tired, dismissive. "Honey, can't you just let it go? You know how Clara gets. She didn't mean it." Didn't mean it. The words nearly broke me. How do you accidentally slap someone across the face and shove them out into the night? How do you not mean humiliating your own sister in front of the entire family? But my mother's tone told me the truth. She didn't care enough to fight for me. I wasn't the daughter she defended. Clara was. Always Clara. Soon, the invitations stopped altogether. No texts about Friday dinners, no calls about birthdays. I would open social media and see the smiling photos. Clara at the head of the table, my parents on either side, everyone raising glasses in a toast. And there, in the captions, words like family first, except me. The loneliness was suffocating. I stopped answering my phone, stopped opening the curtains. I went to work, came home, and sat in silence. Food lost its taste. Music felt like noise. Life blurred into a gray routine. But beneath all that emptiness, something else was stirring. Every humiliation replayed in my head wasn't just pain anymore. It was fuel. Every rejection added to the fire. Every laugh they shared without me became another reason to keep breathing, to keep moving. Because the more they pushed me out, the more determined I became to push back. I started writing again. Not just the journal I had begun after Clara's outburst, but pages upon pages. I poured out my emotions, my memories, my perspective. At first it was for myself, a desperate attempt to organize the chaos inside me. But the more I wrote, the more I realized what I was building. A detailed, undeniable record of everything Clara had done to me over the years. It wasn't just the slap. It was the insults, the manipulation, the way she had undermined me at every family gathering. How she whispered in our parents' ears, convincing them I was unstable, dramatic, less than her. The journal became my mirror, reflecting not the broken woman I felt like, but the truth I had been too blind to see. Clara had been laying the groundwork for this humiliation for years. She hadn't just pushed me out of her house that night. She had orchestrated my exile long before. And that realization didn't crush me. It steadied me. Still, the struggle was real. There were nights when I questioned myself. Am I overreacting? Was it really that bad? Then I'd look in the mirror, trace the faint outline of where her hand had struck, and the memory would answer for me. Yes, it was that bad. Other nights I'd fantasize about storming into the next family dinner, demanding answers, forcing them to acknowledge what they had done. But those fantasies always ended the same way, with me walking out alone again, humiliated, dismissed. The truth was, I didn't just want to be heard. I wanted justice. I wanted Clara to know what it felt like to lose everything she held dear. The turning point came one evening when I passed by a cafe near my office. Through the window, I saw Clara sitting with two of her friends. She was laughing, animated, waving her hands in the air like she was the star of some grand performance. And then I heard it. Through the glass, muffled but unmistakable, she mimicked me, clutching her face, stumbling backward, exaggerating my humiliation for her friends' entertainment. They laughed until one of them nearly spit out her coffee. I froze. My breath caught. My vision blurred at the edges. That moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It wasn't just pain. It was fire. If she could use my humiliation as her comedy material, then she had underestimated me more than I thought. She believed I was weak. She believed I would stay silent. She was wrong. That night, I went home and opened my journal again. But this time, I wasn't just writing memories. I was drafting plans. Detailed, precise, careful plans. I listed Clara's routines, her weaknesses, her secrets. I noted the people who trusted her, the image she had carefully built in the community, the career she was so proud of. I began to think like her, anticipate her moves, predict her excuses. And in those late-night hours, as the world slept, I felt something new awaken inside me. Power. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I knew what was coming. Clara thought she had pushed me out of her house for good. What she didn't know was that she had pushed me straight into the shadows, where I could watch, wait, and prepare. Because when I stepped back into the light, it wouldn't be as her sister. It would be as her reckoning. That night in the cafe replayed in my head like a looped scene I couldn't skip. Clara laughing, her friends leaning in, my face turned into a punchline. The humiliation wasn't the only thing that stung anymore. It was the arrogance in her laughter. She acted like I belonged to her story to be mocked and discarded. That was the moment I stopped wanting sympathy and started wanting results. I didn't decide to get even out of spite. I decided to act because silence had become complicity. Every time I said nothing, I allowed their version of reality to become the only one anyone would ever know. If Clara could build a reputation that erased me, I could build one that forced the truth into the light. First step, clarity. I read through my journal entries until the paper blurred. I highlighted patterns, the whisper to my parents after family dinners, the times she isolated me at gatherings, the specific incidents where she'd planted doubts about me with relatives. I made timelines. I wrote down dates when she had suggested I was too dramatic or unstable. I documented witnesses who had seen her behavior but had stayed quiet. The more I organized, the less chaotic it felt. Strategy needs facts. Facts remove the argument of he said, she said. Second step, evidence. Thinking about how to expose Clara made me practical. Where did reputations live? In people's memories, in conversations, in documents, in photos, in the little digital trails she left. I started small and legal. Screenshots of messages, copies of events where she'd spread rumors, emails where she'd subtly undermined me at family group chats. I saved those files in 3 places: my laptop, a locked cloud folder, and in printed copies sealed in an envelope I gave to a trusted friend with instructions. Open only if I ask. It felt paranoid, but it felt necessary. Third step, allies. There were people who'd watched and felt uncomfortable. The bridesmaid who'd nodded at the reception. The cousin who sent the message asking, "What did you do this time?" Not everyone wanted Clara's version. Some were confused. I reached out slowly, one person at a time, in private messages and quiet coffees. I didn't beg for loyalty. I simply asked if they'd ever noticed the little things. Most admitted, awkwardly, that yes, they had. Some shared memories I hadn't known about. A joke at a holiday party, a whispered insult in a hallway. Each shared moment strengthened the case I was building. People are more willing to admit the truth in private than in front of a room full of performers. Fourth step, control the narrative. If I waited for Clara to tell her story uninterrupted, I'd lose. So I thought about timing and place. There would be a moment when her guard was down, perhaps at a family event where she expected applause, perhaps at a community meeting where her carefully polished image mattered. I didn't want a circus. I wanted a precise reveal that flipped the script without giving her the stage to spin it back. Practically, I prepared a few moves. I would present the evidence calmly, in front of at least one impartial witness, someone respected who could corroborate what I showed. I would keep my emotions measured. Rage would let them paint me as unstable. Instead, I aimed for quiet certainty, the kind of voice that makes people listen because it's steady, not because it screams. I practiced speaking, short sentences, factual statements, no melodrama. On this date, you said this to me. Here is a screenshot of you telling Aunt Kate something different. This receipt shows where you were when you told them you were at work. The power of a simple documented statement is that it removes room for plausible deniability. There were nights I questioned whether I'd become the person I hated, the one who planned revenge instead of seeking healing. In the dark, I would hold my journal and whisper pieces of my future to myself. I will speak. I will be heard. I will not be erased. Those mantras anchored me when doubt crept back in. Then came the practicalities of timing. Clara had a promotion coming up at the community center where she taught yoga classes. She was proud of that role. It fed her status among neighbors and friends. If I wanted the truth to land, I needed a setting where her image mattered. A public forum where her credibility meant something would make the revelation sharper. So I made a plan that balanced discretion and impact. Gather witnesses who mattered, choose a neutral place, and present the facts in a way that everyone could verify. I rehearsed the sequence in my head until it felt inevitable. Step 1. Arrange a casual meetup that looked innocent. Coffee with a mutual friend after a neighborhood event. Step 2. Bring 1 or 2 witnesses who already knew small pieces of the truth. Step 3. When the moment felt natural, slide a printed packet across the table and say, calmly, "I'd like you to read this." Let them read. Let them process. Let their reactions do the work. I tested it on a small scale first. I met with an old friend, Aisha, at a quiet cafe. I didn't open with accusations. I shared memories. I showed one screenshot, a message where Clara had painted me as unstable. Aisha's face changed. She remembered another incident. She asked quietly, "Why did none of us speak up?" I admitted I'd been silent, that I'd wanted to avoid drama. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Not this time," she said. "When you're ready, I'll be there." That small private validation was everything. It proved I wasn't making it up. It proved that when people read the facts without the theater, they listened. After that, I moved faster. I collected more documentation, placed copies where needed, and slowly assembled the circle of people who would back me up when I made my move. I kept my outward life unchanged, smiled at colleagues, paid bills on time, and attended social events with a composed face. The contrast between my calm exterior and the storm I was organizing felt almost surgical. It allowed me to steer the narrative without appearing desperate. On the eve of the reveal, I slept fitfully, not from fear of what might happen to me, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I had rehearsed everything. I had allies who'd seen the evidence. I had backups should anyone try to erase or deny the facts. What remained was the moment itself, when the truth would meet the people who had chosen the lie. As dawn came, I felt a peculiar blend of sorrow and resolve. Sorrow for the sibling I'd loved and the family that had failed to protect me. Resolve because I had chosen to become an active author of my story, rather than a footnote in someone else's. I dressed neatly, packed the envelope with the printed evidence, and took a breath. Clara didn't know yet. She believed the wall she'd built would hold. She believed her performance would keep her safe. She had no idea the sister she'd shoved out into the night was returning, not to beg, not to rage, but to show the world the facts and watch the truth do what it always does. It frees, it clears, and it sometimes brings the house of cards down. When I stepped out of my apartment that morning, I wasn't a broken woman anymore. I was steady, and I was ready. The day of the reveal wasn't planned as a grand event, but it felt like one. Clara thought it was just another family dinner, the kind where she played hostess, smiled brightly, and controlled every conversation at the table. For her, these dinners were theater. For me, it was opening night of a different kind, one where the script was mine, not hers. When I walked into the dining room, I carried myself differently. No hunched shoulders, no nervous glance at the floor. My steps were steady, my face calm. That in itself threw her off. I could see it in the flicker of her eyes. She noticed something was different, though she didn't know what. The meal started as usual. Polite chatter, laughter too loud, Clara inserting herself into every conversation as if she were the glue that held us together. For years, I had let her words wash over me, biting my tongue to keep the peace. But this time, my silence had weight. And silence with weight unsettles people more than words. Halfway through, she did what she always did. She turned the spotlight on me. "Tell us," she said with a smirk. "Are you still trying to figure out what you're doing with your life? Or are we celebrating something?" The table chuckled politely. It was her usual jab, softened just enough to sound like teasing. But my hands didn't shake this time. I looked her straight in the eye. "I have something to share, actually," I said evenly. The room quieted. My voice was calm, but carried. The shift in tone made people lean in. Clara raised her eyebrows, still smiling, but I saw the tension in the way her jaw tightened. I pulled the envelope from my bag and set it on the table. I've been quiet for a long time, too long. And while I stayed quiet, a story about me was told that wasn't true. Tonight, I'd like to show you all the truth. Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" she asked, a laugh at the edge of her words. I didn't answer her directly. Instead, I opened the envelope and slid copies of the printed evidence across the table. Screenshots, messages, contradictions, times, and dates. "Read," I said simply. The sound of paper shuffling filled the room. My uncle's face tightened as he scanned the first page. My aunt's eyes darted from the paper to Clara, then back again. The cousin who had once texted me, "What did you do this time?" now read the proof of how Clara had twisted the story. For once, Clara had no script. "That's fake," she said quickly, her voice louder than before. "She's making this up. Stop," I cut in, not shouting, but firm, steady. Every single one of those messages was saved the day they were sent. They're backed up, stored in multiple places. I can show the originals to anyone who doubts. The table went still again. No one laughed this time. No one dismissed me. I let the silence stretch. The weight of truth doesn't need decoration. Finally, my cousin spoke. "Clara, this is your number. This is your writing." Clara stammered, "You don't understand." "No," I said sharply, my calm breaking just enough to let my hurt show. "For years you've tried to make me look small. You've mocked me in public, whispered lies in private, and acted like it was all just jokes. I've stayed silent. I let you build your image while you destroyed mine. But not anymore. This," I tapped the papers on the table, "is the truth, and everyone can see it now." She looked around desperately, searching for allies. But the room wasn't with her anymore. People avoided her eyes. A few stared at her with something like disbelief, others with disappointment. The power she always carried, the control of the narrative, slipped right out of her hands. And then came the moment that mattered most. I leaned back in my chair, took a breath, and said, "I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to end this. No more whispers, no more lies. If you have something to say about me from now on, say it here, out loud, in front of everyone. Otherwise, don't say it at all." That was the strike. Not screaming, not revenge by fire, but the removal of her stage. She sat frozen, her face pale, lips pressed together so tightly they almost disappeared. For once, Clara, the master of performance, had no lines left to say. The dinner went on awkwardly. Conversations stumbled, then died. Plates clinked softly, but no one was laughing anymore. The atmosphere had shifted, permanently. When I left that night, the air outside felt different. Lighter. The house behind me no longer held me hostage. Clara would still spin stories. People like her always do. But now there was a counterweight. Now there was proof. Now there were witnesses who'd seen the truth laid bare. Walking down the street, I realized revenge wasn't always about destroying someone else. Sometimes it was about reclaiming yourself so completely that the person who tried to erase you could no longer succeed. And that, I thought with a quiet smile, was the most brutal payback of all. The days after that dinner were strangely quiet, almost unnervingly so. For years, I had grown used to the constant undercurrent of Clara's voice running through my life like static. Whispers to relatives, jokes at my expense, little digs dropped into every family gathering. But after that night, the silence was different. It wasn't peace. It was the heavy stillness that follows a storm, when everyone is still assessing the damage. The first text came from my cousin. Just 3 words. "I'm so sorry." No explanations, no excuses, just acknowledgement. Then another message. "I should have asked you before believing anything." I didn't reply immediately. I read those words again and again, letting them sink in. For so long, I had carried the weight of being disbelieved, of being judged without trial. And now, the apologies had begun trickling in, small but steady, like drops of water on parched ground. Clara stayed silent. That told me everything. She wasn't used to silence. She wasn't used to not controlling the story. The absence of her voice was the clearest sign that I had struck where it hurt most. But silence doesn't mean surrender, and I knew my sister too well to think she'd walk away without a fight. Sure enough, a week later, I started hearing things. Not directly, of course. Never directly. But through the grapevine, through the relatives who still clung to neutrality like it was a life raft. "Clara says you're exaggerating." "Clara says you set her up." "Clara says you're obsessed with making her look bad." The difference this time was that people didn't just nod along. They questioned her. Some even pushed back. And that was the shift I had been waiting for. One of my aunts, the one who had always seemed the closest to Clara, called me. She sounded hesitant, her voice carrying both guilt and curiosity. I read what you showed us that night, she said, and I have to admit, I didn't realize how much of it was her twisting things. I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. That apology hit differently. Not just because it came from someone who had stood in Clara's corner for years, but because it was layered with something deeper. Shame. Shame that she had been complicit, even unintentionally. It dawned on me then, my revenge hadn't just exposed Clara. It had exposed everyone who had blindly enabled her, and that, in a way, was more powerful. But it wasn't without cost. Family gatherings became tense. Invitations that used to flow freely slowed to a trickle. There was no more pretending that things were fine. Lines had been drawn, even if no one said it outright. At first, I wondered if I had gone too far, if reclaiming my voice had come at the price of family itself. But then I reminded myself of those years spent swallowing humiliation just to keep the peace. Peace that wasn't peace at all. It was surrender. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. The fallout wasn't destruction. It was cleansing. The truth had burned through the lies, and what was left, though fragile, was real. And Clara? Well, she tried. She posted online about toxic people who pretend to be victims. She dropped hints to friends that I was unstable, dramatic, obsessed. But the thing about proof, hard, undeniable proof, is that it shifts the ground beneath you. Once people have seen it, they can't unsee it. Her words rang hollow now, desperate where they once sounded confident. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one on trial. She was, and I didn't even have to lift a finger anymore. One night, lying in bed, I thought back to the moment she had shoved me out of her house, her voice echoing in my ears. "Get out. You're not welcome here." At the time, it had broken something in me. That rejection, that humiliation, had cut so deep I thought I'd never recover. But now, with distance, I realized something. She hadn't thrown me out of a home. She had thrown me out of a cage. And I wasn't going back in. The fallout wasn't clean. It wasn't easy. But it was freedom. And freedom, after years of silence, felt like the sweetest revenge of all. The days turned into weeks, and the sting of confrontation slowly gave way to something I hadn't expected. Quiet. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of before, but a calmer quiet. A space where I could hear my own thoughts without Clara's voice drowning them out. At first, I didn't know what to do with that space. I had lived so long under her shadow that my identity had been shaped around her, reacting to her, defending myself from her, shrinking in her presence. Who was I when I didn't have to do that anymore? The answer came slowly, in small moments. One morning, I caught my reflection in the mirror and noticed something startling. My posture had changed. I wasn't slouching. I wasn't curling inward like I always did when I expected to be overlooked or mocked. My shoulders were squared, my chin lifted. I looked lighter. Another day, while having coffee with a friend, I laughed so hard my stomach hurt. And halfway through that laughter, I realized it had been years since I had laughed like that. Freely, without caution, without that nagging voice in the back of my head warning me I'd be judged or ridiculed. Healing doesn't arrive in grand gestures. It sneaks in quietly, filling cracks you didn't even know were there. But there were hard moments too. The guilt crept in sometimes. That nagging question. Did I ruin the family? Did I burn too many bridges? On some nights, I'd lie awake, wondering if I could have handled it differently. If maybe there was a way to stand up for myself without fracturing so much. Then I'd remember the look on Clara's face that night. Not just shock, but recognition. She had seen the years of control slip from her fingers. And I'd remind myself, this wasn't about burning bridges. It was about building new ones rooted in truth. Slowly, people reached out. Cousins inviting me for coffee. An aunt asking if I'd join her for a walk. Even my uncle, who had been the quietest at that dinner, called to check in. "You were brave," he said simply. "Braver than most of us." Those words mattered more than he probably knew. Because here's the thing. Revenge had felt powerful, yes. Exposing the lies had been necessary. But healing was something else entirely. It wasn't about them. It was about me. I started journaling, writing down every thought, every memory, every piece of myself I felt had been buried under years of Clara's control. Some pages were messy and angry, others tender and hopeful. But all of it was mine. I began to dream again, too. Dreams I'd set aside because they felt impossible under the weight of her constant belittling. I signed up for a class I'd always wanted to take. I reconnected with an old friend I'd drifted from because I was too busy surviving family politics. I let myself want things again. And with every step, I realized something profound. The real revenge wasn't the night I exposed her. The real revenge was living fully, freely without her hold on me. One afternoon, I bumped into a relative at the store. Someone who had once been quick to believe Clara's stories. She hesitated when she saw me, then smiled awkwardly. "You look happy," she said. I smiled back. "I am." It was the simplest truth. For so long, I had thought of myself as the victim in Clara's story. Then, briefly, I became the avenger in my own. But now I was simply me. Not defined by her, not limited by her, not shadowed by her. And that was freedom. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder if I'd have had the courage to do it sooner. To stand up, to draw the line, to say the words that had sat like fire in my chest for years. Get out of my house. But timing is strange. It happens when it needs to. Maybe I wasn't ready before. Maybe I needed all those years of silence, all those small cuts to finally gather the strength to roar. Because that night wasn't just about Clara. It wasn't even just about the lies she told or the control she held. It was about me reclaiming myself. And here's the truth I learned. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about liberation. Sometimes it's not about bringing someone else down, but about lifting yourself up high enough that they can't touch you anymore. Clara hasn't spoken to me since, and I don't lose sleep over it. For once, her absence feels like peace, not punishment. I don't wait for her approval. I don't brace for her criticism. I don't build my days around the storm she carried everywhere. My house feels different now. Lighter. Warmer. It's mine in a way it never was when her presence filled every corner with tension. Sometimes I'll sit by the window with a cup of tea and just breathe. That may not sound like much, but to me, it feels like victory. And the family? They've shifted too. Slowly, people started to see what I endured. Some even admitted they'd known, deep down, but hadn't wanted to get involved. Do I resent them? No, I understand. Fear makes people quiet. But my voice, finally loud and steady, gave them permission to speak too. So what's the lesson? It is this. You don't have to live your whole life under someone else. As shadow. You don't have to shrink yourself so someone else can feel taller. You don't have to keep the peace when that peace is built on your silence. Revenge isn't always slamming doors or delivering speeches that leave jaws on the floor. Sometimes the deepest revenge is choosing yourself. Choosing freedom. Choosing peace. Clara never saw my revenge coming because it wasn't just that one night. It was everything after. The laughter I found again. The confidence I rebuilt. The way I no longer bowed my head when her name came up. She lost her grip, and I found my life. If you've ever been in a place like that, if someone has ever made you feel small, controlled, silenced, know this. You are stronger than you think. The day will come when your voice won't just tremble. It will shake the walls. And when it does, you'll realize the truth I now carry with me every day. The sweetest revenge isn't making them fall. It's rising so high, they can't follow. And that's where my story ends. Outro and engagement, YouTube ready. And that's how it all unfolded. My sister thought she could silence me forever, but in the end, I found my voice. And with it, my freedom. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had someone in your life who tried to control you or make you feel small? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. If you connected with this story, don't forget to hit the like button. It really helps more people discover these powerful stories. And if you're new here, Subscribe and turn on notifications because I upload fresh, dramatic stories every single day, each one with a twist you won't see coming. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't payback, it's peace.